I would have assumed that you had it done.
Can we write in purple pen?
Anybody know what page we're on?
Because it's the mix of the two colors.
I like.
Well, we didn't have to.
All right, we are now ready to have a series of comments
What page?
that are going to be focused on the study of American literature. As junior students at Moreland High in room 303, we are obliged for 2 semesters to study American literature, American thought. How specifically are we going to approach this study? What are the parameters of our time together? How will we use our reading to try to enhance our understanding? All of these are questions I'll try to now address. The place I think I want to start, and we kind of began here, but I'm going to backtrack, is in the table of contents and in that timeline study that we were working with before. If on the paper in front of you, and you'll notice how I review this over and over to start to kind of place it in your memory. If on the paper in front of you, you would create your history timeline with that 0 mark constituted as, again, what? The birth of Christ. Very good, right? The birth of Christ. And then we have events going in both directions. We have events that we call before the Common Era, BCE, and events that we call Common Era, or sometimes referred to as AD. We sit out here, of course, at 2012, which puts us in the 21st century. Notice how I wrote that, please. 21ST with a large C around it is the proper nomenclature for ourselves. Now, there's a few dates here that I think already I've said that I want you to kind of have on your timeline. What BC dates, don't say them out loud, what BC dates are you going to already be able to constitute on your timeline from an earlier conversation? If you know them, write them down. We'll see if I've got anybody in here that remembers them. I'll give you a hint. One of them is from 399 BCE, the death of Socrates, an important figure for us in the Greek tradition. Let's run roughly at 200 with the rise of Rome, although these are very general dates, obviously. Caesar gets jacked the Ides of March in what year? 44 BCE, before Christ's birth. And we want to pay particular attention to a year like 410 Common Era. Does anyone remember what happened on that date? The fall of Rome. Outstanding, Miss Smith. Right? Now, that's obviously a dubious date, just like any number of these dates are general round dates for us. Gibbon will tell us in 1776, when he publishes the fall of the Roman Empire, that 410 is an important year, and so we kind of collectively think of it in that way. We already asked this question now, and we'll ask it again. When we start thinking then about American history, what dates do we begin to play with on our timeline? Well, one date that's going to make it kind of interesting for us is that little ditty we learned as children about sailing the ocean blue. Who did it?
Columbus.
You'll remember, Columbus, we're told, sails in when? 1492, 8 years before what century? Don't say it, write it. 8 years before what century? When we get to 1500, we are at what century? Well, here we are in 2012. Notice the first 2 numbers, 20, and we're in the 21st century, right? Which means we go up. Which means if I'm at 1500, I'm in what century? That's right, the 16th century, okay? So we would argue that if you're going to talk about America pre-16th century, you're talking about predominantly the geographic region that we will call the United States of America. There are people living here in that time. Okay? There are lots of people living here in that time. We don't call them Americans, we call them Native Americans. Now, why do we use that adjective native prior?
They were first.
Right. We talk about these as being individuals prior to, native to, the geography that we will come to refer to as the United States of America. But it's still a problematic term because we're not real sure about a lot of these people. We're not real sure about their origins, where they came from, their histories. We know really interesting things, though, about these people by virtue of their displacement. What does that word mean, displacement? To displace a people means what? You make them move, to force them to become migratory. So, for example, we know that there are Native American tribes living in the southwestern desert of the United States many years later who still have stories about heroes who jump from the tops of 100-foot trees. Now, I don't know if you've been to Phoenix lately, but you don't find 100-foot trees growing in Phoenix. There's a reason for that. It's the middle of a desert. Why would a native peoples then have stories about a hero jumping from 100-foot treetops? Well, because these native peoples did not always live in the desert of Southwest America. We know that originally they came from New England, the area we call New York. And there, of course, you do find forests with trees that are really, really tall. When Christopher Columbus lands in what later will be called the Americas, he brings with him, of course, European culture. And the effects are devastating. Write down some of the immediate ways that these effects are devastating. How does Christopher Columbus's arrival bring certain kinds of serious problems for the indigenous peoples? What's one immediately? Go ahead. Yeah, there's a problem right away. Because these indigenous peoples are not at all familiar with peoples outside of their own domain. So germs immediately become serious problems. Infestations, emphysema, it's terrible. Whole tribes of people will contact smallpox, for example, and will be dead in a matter of weeks. Whole tribes. We're talking thousands and thousands of people will simply die due to infections. There's more. And it is going to be for us a very difficult study at times, when we will ask, how is it possible that people could be treated so inhumanely, treated really badly? Of course, there will be as well religious attempts to convert the inhabitants of these native countries to, these native regions, to a Christianity, and when they refuse, terrible things will happen to them. Ultimately, Columbus comes to the New World for what primary reason? What is it that he's really looking for?
Spices in India.
It's money. Let's just use collectively. It's money, isn't he? He's trying to make bank, isn't he? And the question becomes quickly, how do you make bank? How do you make bank from another country? What's the way you do that? The only way to do that is to take stuff that's there and bring it back to your country, right? And then try and sell it. Okay? Early on, what is the primary thing that everyone's looking to try and bring back? Does anybody know? What is it that maybe they think they might be able to find in new worlds?
Gold.
Stuff, gold. You bet, precious stones and gold. And you can bring that stuff back to Europe. You can sell it and make lots of money. Okay? Later, it would become what we call natural resources. Lots and lots of trees and stuff like that, right? The movement then of American history will begin with this kind of first contact, followed by more contact to come. But now we're going back to your table of contents, and we're looking at the way your textbook will divide up the units. In the first unit, we're going to focus on those indigenous peoples who were here, right? And then In the second unit, we're going to begin to talk about the first of the Europeans, namely who? Who is it that predominates the eastern seaboard originally? Who are all these people that come over on the Mayflower and other boats? Who are these people? They are English. Yes, they are English. Now, this is important to point out. Geographically, England is a very small piece of rock. You can drive today from the eastern side to the western side of England in just a matter of hours, okay? It is very easy to do. The problem, of course, is that when you have such a small landmass, you don't have lots of natural resources. In other words, if you burned every tree on the island we call Britain, you pretty much run out of wood pretty quickly. Is this making sense? So there's going to be a need for the extraction of resources from the quote-unquote mother country. Okay? So we will immediately see that as well. This movement from England going to the New World had something to do with economics. And yet, let's say it out loud now. There's another reason why these people decided to get in boats and to sail across the Atlantic Ocean. Of course, the Atlantic is a very dangerous body of water. Terrible storms can happen. The ride on the boat over is going to be problematic, dangerous. Question, put it in your notes. Why would these people brave the terribly dangerous journey across the ocean to come to these newly derived colonies on the eastern seaboard of what later will be called America? Why?
Freedom.
Our answer is freedom, Ms. Smith says. Freedom. I don't understand though, amplify. Freedom from what? Freedom from a king.
Taxes.
Now wait a minute, these are English people and they want freedom. Freedom to do what?
Do what they want.
Freedom to do what they want.
Open business.
So for example, when these people all arrive, they will allow the people who arrive to do whatever they want.
Kind
To expand their
of.
territory.
Civilized way.
To expand England's territory.
Well, let's stay with freedom for a moment. I'm interested because obviously they did come here for a certain kind of freedom, but again I'll ask,
Freedom.
freedom to do what?
Reclaim the land.
What is it they wanted to be able to do here they couldn't do there?
Like
That's
to-
another way to say it.
prosper, to get ahead in the world.
Prosper, to get
Not
ahead,
be
economically
taxed.
prospering, getting ahead, good. Ms. Watson?
Religious freedom.
That's the big one. It's like a junior once said to me, you gotta be kidding me. The people who arrived here came because they wanted to have the right to go to church? And of course we must say, yeah, kinda, pretty much, yeah. In fact, these religious people, we call them today Puritans, are a people that so much want to practice their brand of religious faith, they will brave the tremendously dangerous journey. Of course, there's going to be an interesting irony here. Let's point it out now. These people who come to the eastern seaboard because they want religious freedom, when they arrive, what's the one thing they don't practice?
Good.
Religious freedom. How so? Well, what if you're a guy who doesn't want to go to church on a Sunday morning? Dude, I think I'd rather sleep in today than go to... Way wrong answer. What do you mean, way wrong answer? You don't get up and go to church? Pretty much soap on a rope, toast on a post. You got me? In other words, this group of people are going to say, if you're going to be part of our group, you are going to do it the way we believe it should be done. Well, that's kind of interesting, isn't it? People who wanted certain kinds of freedoms are fairly intolerant once they get here. But wait a minute. That we know to be true. And it's always easy to point fingers and to become angry about that fact. But that's only because we haven't started thinking yet about a little observation I'm now going to make. When these people arrive and get off their boat, there ain't no Walmart.
There ain't no Walmart.
I'll say it again, and I want you to write it down. And then I want you to start to think about what I just said. Because what I just said is going to be the most important thing of my lecture. When these people arrive from England and get off the boat, there ain't no Walmart. Now I want you to jot down in your notes what you think I'm really saying when I say there ain't no Walmart. What does that mean? Keep going. There's nobody sitting. There's nobody sitting there with prepackaged food
They have to
for them.
all
There's
themselves.
certain-
None. No prepackaged food of any kind. The long journey over, in fact, often depleted resources long before they arrived. There were stories of people starving to death before they ever even arrived because it took so long for the boat to get here. Their food, their water, they show up. There ain't no Walmart. You know, it's like a freshman once asked me, Mr. McGee, when they pick the bread off the tree, is it already in the plastic with the little thingy, or does it have to be put in the plastic bag? And it was funny because a number of students started laughing, and I felt badly for the poor little freshman, and so I said, well, why don't we all take out a blank sheet of paper, and I'd like everyone who's laughing to actually write down where bread comes from. A whole lot of students were shocked to discover that when you're eating bread, you're eating grass.
Oh, it's brown.
Just kind of blew their mind. Of course, when we talk about grass and we talk about grain, we're talking about the same thing, aren't we? But wait a minute. There's a serious problem. If you just got off the boat and you ain't got no bread, and the only way you're going to get bread is by growing grain, where are you going to grow it? It's got to be grown in the ground. But wait a minute, everything we know about the geography of the eastern seaboard is, what? Do you know what it looks like? What is it on the eastern seaboard? It's all rock and forest. I told you, tall trees, really tall trees. So the first thing they have to do is to find some way to try to clear areas to grow the grain. But wait a minute, we live in a farming community. You can't just plant it and then 4 days later you've got grain.
That would be nice.
Right? That ain't the way it works at all. Keep going. We've only hit the food part of it. Keep going.
They didn't really think this.
What else? What
They
else?
don't have like houses.
That's
like,
right. Let's talk about it. Let's
They
write
should've
this one
brought
down.
tanks.
They cut
Let's
down
write it
trees.
down.
They're little-
When you show up, there's no Holiday Inn waiting for you
Tan.
with the continental breakfast to follow in the
There
morning.
was a tent.
What is there being said when we say this? What is the point we're making? Jot it down in your notes. When you don't have any form of protection from the elements, you have to build something. Of course, if you're going to build a house, you're going to have to build it out of wood. Where's the wood going to come from?
All around them.
How are you going to fell, that is to say, chop down, how are you going to fell 100-foot trees?
Little
The
axes
saw.
and saws.
Gotta have tools. What happens if you didn't put the tools on the boat with you, or
You made a mistake.
what happens if you did put the tools on the boat, but you only put a few of them? For example,
And you go
What-
capture beavers.
serious question. Serious question. If you can't cut down trees, how are you going to make a house to live in?
You pick up dead ones.
See?
You pick up sticks.
Okay. Of course, let's point out for your notes the seasonal problems. When you arrive, you usually are going to arrive in the summertime. Summer on the eastern seaboard can be warm, just like it is here in Wyoming. It can be really hot. But as we hit September, October, the weather on the eastern seaboard starts to change. Because of the nature of the Atlantic Ocean, cold winds come in. Chilling cold winds, along with intense amounts of snow. There are recorded 5 foot, 6 foot in one day, 6 feet of snow falling because of the amount of weather that comes off of the Atlantic Ocean. We're talking about people who arrive, many of them don't even have a coat. When they arrive, they don't need a coat. By the time the winter arrives, the stories of these people freezing to death, prodigious number of stories where they just freeze to death. They don't have any food, they don't have any shelter, and they don't have any means to create enough of it. And so they die. Question, observation. When you are in this mode, what do you call it? Survival mode. Survival mode. So we're going to ask an important question about early American thought. Early American practice is in large measure going to require that everyone is part of the group. Why? Why does everyone need to be a part of the group? Why is inclusivity so necessary? Everyone's got to be a part of the group. Why does everyone have to be on the same team?
So few of them.
There's so few of them. Keep going.
And they have not like enough resources to go
You
against
got it. The only way they're going to survive, what we're saying here now is so important. The only way they're going to survive is for everyone to be united. United. So you're going to force everyone to be united. In other words, individuals in the early stages, not a lot of freedoms that we would call individual freedoms. Okay? Everyone's got to be a part of the group so that the group can survive. Why? Because there ain't no Walmart. There's nothing waiting here for them. The only way they're going to survive, and they barely did it anyway, is to have the ability to come together as a group. How do you bring everyone together and unite them? Jot it down. How did they do it? What was the way that they did it? What was the commonality for all of them that brought them together as a unit? What bonded them? And we call them Puritans for this reason. What bonded them, what brought them together, what united them was what? That's right, their religious practice, wasn't it? These Puritans had a very clear understanding of what it meant to bring the group together. You cannot have dissenting voices. You can't have people arguing all the time. So, you create a hierarchy. Some people are in charge, other people have to follow. That hierarchy we often will refer to as a theocracy. Theos, just coming from our word meaning God. In other words, the religious officials are the ones in charge. They will tell everyone what to do. Now we today might say about that, wait a minute, that's not fair. The answer we're giving here is what? It might not have been fair, but it was what? What would be the word you would use? It might not have been fair, it was necessary. Good, we want to write it down as that. It was necessary. If you are going to begin to live in a brand new place, you have got to be able to have some kind of unity. That unity is founded upon a certain kind of theological view. Okay? And everyone kind of buys into it, and everyone grows together, or dies separate. Make sense? So the challenge for us early on is to accept that. Of course, there are other problems in this regards. To be able to grow the amount of crops that need to be grown to make money, there has to be a labor force, and that labor force is not going to come from England, right down where it does come from. This will, of course, be one more deeply troubling element of American thought. And yet, if we're going to be honest scholars, we have to address it. How is it possible, Mr. McGee? We will ask and try to answer this question later. Again, these are just opening comments for an American Lit course. How is it possible that the very man who wrote the words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of property." That man who wrote those words owned slaves. Tom Jefferson owned slaves. Right up until the day he died, he owned slaves. How is that possible? The great American Frederick Douglass will ask this question, and we'll have to address this question. How is that possible? African slaves are brought through a process of the slave trade across the Atlantic, making usually their arrival in the southern Caribbean, down south of Florida, and then ultimately making their way by boat up to seaports on the eastern seaboard. And we'll have to ask and answer this question as well. Of course, ultimately, this practice of buying and selling human beings will be the source of America's greatest conflict, what we will call the Civil War, right? Civil War. What do we mean when we use the word civil? Of or related to the family. It's a family war. Americans fighting against Americans for the right, not only for this right, but by and large for the right to own slaves. But why did they need the slaves? Well, they needed slaves to be able to have the large numbers of crop plantations that they plant. And they don't have the labor force without forced labor. And so they go and get these people, pick them up from their country, and bring them over here. And it begs an obvious question: how could they do this and be devoutly religious people? And they were, by and large, devoutly religious people. And yet they participated in slave trade. How do you account for that? We'll have to try and answer that question as well. Finally, there will be questions about the changing of values in America. One of the examples that I like to use is that in the very early years in the colonies, for a young girl to walk and for her dress to come up so that her ankle bone was seen by a male could lead to punishment for her of the most extreme kind even. And yet, not even 200 years later, on the MTV Music Awards stage, three of the most popular musicians of the day, Madonna, Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, you were quite young at the time, and yet there was a performance on that stage that led to a kiss by all three of those girls to each other. The clothing that they were wearing was almost no clothing. And it led a large number of us that kind of study American thought to ask this question: how could America have come from, if you see the ankle bone, you get dunked in water over it again to be punished? 200 years later, to the MTV Music Awards, how could America move like that? And we'll try to answer that question as well. America will be for us then an interesting study, won't it? Now, how will we do this study? Chronology. We'll begin with our earliest recorded histories, stories that the Native Americans will tell us that will become the earliest kinds of Native Indigenous stories that we know of, most of them oral to begin with. And then we'll study the early colonial period. We'll follow that with a study of that time that we call the American Civil War, and then, of course, beyond the American Civil War, into the century that you were born into, the 20th century, of course, and beyond. All right? So our study begins now very early with some approaches to annotation, and tomorrow we'll take a look at Chopin's Story of an Hour as a way to kind of at least begin that process. Thank you.